Today on BRStv Investigates, a deeper look into the Giesemann Spectra T5 Halide hybrid lighting than ever done before. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates, a weekly YouTube series which explores popular reefing theories, products, methods, and what the manuals are missing with a focus on putting them to the test, and then give away everything we test at the end. Today we're going to take a complete look at the Giesemann Spectra T5 Halide hybrid lighting from all the important angles based around coral health, visual appeal, and available features weighted in that exact order. Given a moment to think about it, I don't think that anyone would suggest that a phone app or cloud effect is more important than the light's ability to grow corals, keep them healthy and colorful. So jumping right into it, there's three distinct points that we're going to look at coral health from: adequate par, par distribution, and spectrum. Starting with adequate par with a focus on SPS corals, since almost any light can provide enough par for lower light types of corals. Our SPS par goal is a par range of 250 to 350, a goal we detailed pretty thoroughly in the previous episode called How Much Par for SPS. To demonstrate the par potential of this type of light, we positioned a 24-inch Spectra over our 2-foot cube par testing tank with a 36-point, 20-inch by 20-inch grid of test points spaced 4 inches apart, and measurements taken at a depth of 6 inches, 12 inches, and 18 inches deep in the tank. The light was positioned 5.5 inches above the tank, which is 6.5 inches above the water. We selected this height because it was the highest that we could position the light without significant amounts of light spillover into the room, and all the bulbs were burned in for 100 hours. Starting at 6 inches, there's a 36-point average of 342, which is the upper range of our par goal, but obviously the brightest, directly under the halide lamp at this shallow depth. There are peaks in the 500s, but a vast majority of the par readings are in the 3 to 400s. This is above our target range, but will always be brightest at the top of the tank, and the corals can be acclimated to this type of intensity. At 12 inches deep, there's a 36-point average of 300 par, with almost every point in the 2 to 300 range, with the exception of the strip of measurements along the back, which is directly related to the back of the tank being painted black, which changes the reflective properties of the glass. We painted it black because that represents a majority of the actual tanks out there. At 18 inches deep, we're seeing a 36-point average par of 256, with still a vast majority of the measurements in the 2 to 300s. Overall, I think there's no question that this light is providing adequate par for almost any reef tank. Next thing we're going to look at is a deeper look into the distribution of that par. The goal isn't to have 250 to 350 in a single square in the center, but the ability to do that as evenly as possible throughout the entire tank with as few hot spots as possible. To do that, we'll look at three different elements with the Spectra: the distribution, the 24-inch cube, distribution with multiple light sources in the larger 120-gallon, as well as the effect of raising up the light a couple inches has on par. Starting with the par distribution on the 24-inch cube, I would say other than the highest point closest to the halide bulb, the par is fairly evenly distributed throughout the tank with mostly subtle graduation and shifts in intensity, but there are a couple of notes here reefers should consider. At all three levels, the light across the back of the tank is significantly lower. Again, this is the impact of painting the glass black. You could choose to not do that, and the back of the tank will likely be fairly close to the front of the tank readings. That said, most reefers stack rock on the back of the tank, or at least don't put a tremendous amount of corals behind the rock work within 6 or so inches of the back glass, so it likely won't make a major impact for most aquascapes. You'll also note that at a shallow depth of 6 inches, the measurements taken directly under the halide bulb will be the highest. However, when we measure at 12 inches deep, the highest measurements are trending away from the center. This is true of a lot of halide installations because the bulb emits light in every direction, but maybe only a fourth to a third of that is hitting the water at an angle which will enter the tank. It's really the larger reflector, which is the primary light source, which captures much of the light and redirects it back into the tank in a wider distribution pattern than a single lamp element, which is really only the size of a quarter. In conjunction with that, the glass is reflecting a lot of the light that hits it back into the tank. As we get deeper into this, you're going to see glass plays a large role into the redistribution of light in the aquarium. Moving on to the 120 and how multiple light sources interact with each other, at 6 inches deep, it looks a lot like you might expect, with two peaks right underneath the halide lamps. You might also notice the left appears to be brighter than the right side. That's not really the case because the sides average about the same amount of light. The right side is just distributed a bit more evenly and has a smaller hot spot. This is almost certainly because the reflectors face in the same direction, and since there's a large socket coming out of the side of the reflector, there has to be differences in how it reflects light and how the glass on each side further redirects it. Moving to 12 inches deep, you can see the light is now remarkably flat, with the 4 T5 bulbs and 2 halide bulbs blending into what I would describe a very evenly distributed par, which is going to evenly illuminate the corals from a variety of angles. Looking at the center of the tank, a vast majority of the tank measurements are within 75 par of each other. Going down to 18 inches, we now see something somewhat different, and the light directly under the halide bulbs are no longer the brightest point in the tank. It's actually where the light from the 2 separate lamps and reflectors intersect. This is an important factor to consider when implementing your lighting setup, particularly as you get closer to the bottom of the tank. If you space them too close together, the brightest point will often be between the light sources rather than under them. In this case, the Giesemann actually has spaced them out pretty well, even though the graph is showing a distinct pattern. The difference is mostly within 75 par of each other, which is pretty flat compared to other reef tank lighting sources out there. One thing we wanted to show you is mounting height plays a large role in the distribution of par in the tank. This depends on the lamp and reflector design, but in general, the further you raise the light source, the more spillover you get into the room, which will reduce the overall par, but at the same time achieve better distribution of that par. We raise the Spectra to 8.5 inches above the water, and you can see a distinct difference, particularly in the top portion of the tank. At a height of 6.5 inches, we're seeing peaks approaching 700 par and just 350 12 inches to the left. At 8.5 inches, the hot spot directly into the bulb is much less impactful, and between just 500 and 350. However, the overall 66-point par average drops from 383 to 343, likely due to the spillover of light into the room. Looking at the average par 12 inches deep between the 2 mounting heights, the 66-point average drops from 360 to 318. However, rather than seeing lots of high 300s and 400s, at 8.5 inches above the tank, virtually every single measurement is now precisely inside that 250 to 350 pocket we're looking for. Same results at 18 inches deep, slightly lower par overall at the higher mounting height. However, a vast majority of the par measurement points right inside that window that we're looking for or just slightly outside of it. Overall, I'd say the Giesemann Spectra with 2 medium-sized reflectors and 4 T5 bulbs is producing fairly well dispersed light, which is going to be effective at preventing shadowing or shading corals and minimal hotspots. The hotspots near the bulbs are predictable and manageable. Looking at today's data, I would personally mount it at 8.5 inches above the water, which in this case is 7.5 inches off the top of the tank. I'll always trade a small amount of par reduction for more even distribution of that par, as long as the light spillover into the room is acceptable. Moving on to the last component of coral health, spectrum. Spectrum goals are a bit harder to judge because the reefing community is still learning a lot about spectrum, but we all universally agree that the blue range is the most important and commonly believed to promote the formation of the most fluorescent pigments. In fact, a lot of reefers have been tremendously successful using only the ATI Blue Plus bulb, which is almost exclusively in the blue spectrum. When we evaluate light sources throughout this series, we're going to provide data on the spectrum offered and an opinion on if it covers the important spectrums. In this case, that's a bit irrelevant because you're going to buy bulbs and they all have unique spectrums. My only comment on spectrum in this case is there's quite a few options out there which have proven themselves to produce awesome results. However, you're somewhat limited by the bulb options out there, which have been dwindling over the years, particularly in relation to halides. However, beyond that, we're going to cover spectrum blending and spectrum hotspots as well. In the case of LEDs, each LED has a very narrow spectrum band, and the goal is to blend them into a single cohesive spectrum. Some do that pretty evenly, and others have pretty significant hotspots where the spectrum is drastically different. So we're going to look at how well each one does that. In this case, we have 3 different spectrum bulbs with the radium, blue plus, and coral plus. They're all each wider spectrum than a single LED, but at the same time, we'd like to see them blended well. To test that, we're going to look at this from 2 angles. One designed to look at static spectrum hotspots, where the design or placement of the light sources produces uneven distribution and poor mixing of the various lamps. We're going to take the spectrum measurements on a 9-point 24-inch grid with measurements taken 19 inches from the light source. This is designed to simulate the spectrum distribution and blending in the middle of a common 2-foot deep tank once common lighting mounting height is factored in. Looking at the various measurement points, you can see there's subtle changes in spectrum at all 9 points, but the major peaks stay the same, and I would say the fixture is blending the spectrum from the various bulbs pretty well. I think this is what most people would expect from wider spectrum lighting technology, a decent sized halide reflector, and diffused lighting options like T5s. Beyond that, we're also going to look at dynamic spectrum hotspots, where we look at how the lenses and reflectors impact spectrum in an actual tank environment which has moving water, and how those reflectors and lenses react with the surface ripples, which are essentially lenses themselves. As an example, if you can visually see red, green, or other colors shooting around the tank with your eye, there are almost certainly significant spectrum hotspots shooting around the tank. To do this, we're going to add some flow and surface ripples with a power head near the top of the tank, and then take 9 measurements through the bottom pane of the glass under the tank, directly in the center for each measurement. This not only represents the lowest point in the tank where the spectrum should be blended the best, but absolutely gives a window into how the reflector and lens design focuses the spectrums cohesively, or if they shoot individual spectrums around the tank. You can see the Giesemann Spectra's lamp placement and reflectors blend the spectrum pretty well. Similar subtle changes between the 9 different measurement points mean the surface ripples are catching the different spectrums from the various bulbs and shooting them around the tank to some degree. Overall, as long as you're using different bulbs designed to create a single desired spectrum, there will always be some spectrum hotspots, but I think today's results are an example of what good looks like, with only the best options performing better. And I think that you'll see a lot of the LED options perform less than desirable in this regard. Overall, looking at par intensity, par distribution, and spectrum, this light is fully capable of supporting even the highest demand tanks right out of the box. It distributes light well, and because we're using bulbs which have tens of thousands of successful tanks behind them, we know that's far from an issue. This light can grow corals, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone. Next is the visual appeal of the corals in tank, because shortly after keeping the corals healthy and growing, the main point of all this is we want the light to make the corals in tank look awesome. End of story. In relation to that, I'm going to briefly cover all the main elements related to that with any light we review: coral pop, contrast or sense of depth, shimmer, dimming, lunar lights, and the physical appeal of the light fixture itself. The first of which is coral pop, or the ability of the lighting to highlight the coral's color pigments in the most attractive manner. This is almost completely related to the available spectrums and technology. Since the bulbs are all swappable, with a halide T5 hybrid you can hit basically any spectrum, and radium halides are particularly known for making corals pop. So I'm going to say that Spectra is certainly capable of some of the best coral pop out there, with a small caveat that there are some blue LEDs which really excel at this, so there's always room for improvement. It's really difficult to show on camera, but halide T5 hybrids can also produce amongst the best balance between even illumination and a high contrast, interesting image with a sense of depth. Meaning rather than a flat, visually uninteresting image, there are shadows, areas which are visually darker and lighter, which makes any scene a lot more interesting, and frankly the difference between a colorful image and a stunning, visually compelling scene. The Giesemann Spectra certainly achieves that high contrast image that we're looking for. In terms of shimmer, or the effect that adds a sense of movement to the tank and transitions from what looks like a flat painting of a reef into what looks like a living, moving section of the reef in your home, halides are one of the standards of shimmer because the amount of shimmer achieved is natural and has a single uniform color. Unlike LEDs, which also add movement, can often have a flicker, static, or disco ball effect rather than a true shimmer. I think halide T5 hybrid shimmers are actually better than halide alone because the T5 softens or mutes the shimmer a bit and makes it a bit more natural looking. One thing the Spectra doesn't do particularly well is dimming. The ability to dim the tank and do sunrise, sunset effects produces an evolving image of the tank throughout the day, which often changes color as well. This is absolutely a visually cool effect that the Spectra does not do particularly well. The integrated T5 ballasts don't dim, and there are some dimming halide ballasts out there, but they don't go low enough to achieve the effect that most reefers are looking for. Most people will turn the T5s or halides on first to simulate some amount of dusk to dawn effects, but it isn't as visually compelling as the LED dimming effects. Similar to that, the Spectra does not have any included lunar light ability. Lunar lights give a really neat twinkle or sparkle to the tank at night, and again can be a visually cool effect, but best done with low power LEDs, which are not included with the Spectra. I'd also note that many people claim that low-level moonlights reduce the chances that some fish will spook and jump out at night, as well as promote spawning with some species of fish and even coral when implemented correctly. Last visual element is the actual appeal of the light itself on the tank. Many reefers don't care, but a lot of us want the outside of the tank to look as nice as the inside of the tank because the tank, stand, and light need to match the look and feel of the other furniture in the room. I think most reefers will universally agree that the Giesemann makes the best looking lighting fixtures in the industry. The Spectra has minimal cords, clean looking mounting system, and the dark iridium powder coat will fit almost every decor from ultra modern to more classic styles. This fixture just looks clean on the top of pretty much any tank in any environment. Moving on to the last component that we're going to evaluate the lights on, available features. This includes mounting options, on and off-board controllability, intuitive modes, controller compatibility, build quality, quiet operation, and energy efficient design. Starting with the mounting options, you will have to hang the Spectra from the ceiling or consider mounting brackets like the one Giesemann makes. They don't make a leg mounting option. Taking the time to hang it from the ceiling will make for the cleanest install and make it the easiest to move the light out of the way for maintenance, but it obviously takes an hour or so to do properly, and you need to do it safely and securely. Many reefers just prefer options which come with legs because of the ease of initial install. If that's the case, the Spectra might not be the right option. In terms of controllability, this is pretty old technology and not LEDs, so there's zero controllability in the light itself. No phone app, no hooking it up to your computer, no onboard controller or display, not even an on-off switch. Just plugs. Most reefers will use a digital timer or aquarium controller to automatically turn the Spectra's lamps on or off. Same could be said of intuitive modes and controller compatibility. Many LEDs now provide cool programs which can guide you into setting the light up right or allow you to hook them up into your aquarium controller for advanced programming, but none of that really applies to this type of lighting and not the Spectra. Again, you could pick up a dimmable halide ballast and hook it up to your controller, but it isn't going to dim as much as many reefers might want. Really, I wouldn't consider this light for advanced controllability options because it doesn't have any. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why many reefers will be interested in a light like this: simple plug-and-play results. Plug it in and produce the type of results halide T5 hybrids are capable of without the need for par meters and tuning spectrum and output. Considering build quality of the light is fairly simple because it's mostly just some reflectors and a couple of T5 ballasts and a housing. On one hand, the housing is really solid, something you can feel the moment you touch it. There's some serious weight to the materials used. On the other hand, there are a couple areas where form came before function, starting with the two T5 bulbs on each side. They share a single reflector, which is not the most efficient design. However, it likely helps with spectrum blending at the cost of maximum par output. The main one is cooling. This is a passively cooled fixture, meaning there are no fans. Net result of that is the T5 bulbs are going to run hotter than ideal temps, which will reduce the power output and might shorten the longevity of the lamps to some degree. You'll have to decide for yourself if that's a legit issue for you, because judging by the data that we shared earlier, I don't think anyone using this fixture is going to come to the conclusion that they don't have enough power, so it's probably more of a perceived issue than a real one. However, that leads us into the next feature, which is quiet operation. Because it has no fans, there's zero noise, meaning the light is dead silent, which I think a lot of people find desirable in their living rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, or anywhere else you might want to put a reef tank but want limited amounts of noise. And the last feature that we're going to cover is energy efficient design. This is what I would refer to as the example of what we're trying to get away from in terms of energy efficiency. There's a lot of heat generated here from the halide bulbs, and heat is more or less wasted energy in most cases. To compound that, some reefers might need to pick up a chiller to deal with the heat, which is even more wasted energy. Halides just soak up a lot of power. Overall, this fixture is going to consume around 460 watts in a 2-foot tank and 920 in a 4-foot tank without the chiller even being considered. If you're attempting to reduce your carbon footprint or live in an area where energy is expensive, you should understand this before you pick up a light like this one. All things considered, I'm going to wrap up this whole review by saying the T5 Halide hybrids are what I consider the gold standard of lighting. The right PAR is easy to achieve, the distribution of that PAR is solid, spectrum is a non-issue because of the time-tested results from the various bulbs out there, and the initial purchase price is arguably lower than a majority of the LED options capable of providing the same PAR results. There's a trade-off here for everything, and in this case, it's trading technology and energy efficiency for easy-to-replicate results. So what if you want a Giesemann Spectra for free? Well, click that box that just showed up, or even easier, head on over to our site and click on the Specials and Deals tab, where you can find the free stuff and prizes that we give away each week. This week, we're giving away a Giesemann Spectra with Lux Core ballast. If you miss it, don't worry, because we give away awesome stuff each week, so sign up anyways. I'm also super interested in what all of you think of the Spectra and T5 Halide hybrid lighting in general, so check out our Reef to Reef thread and see what your fellow reefers think. I know a lot of us love our LEDs, so I can't wait to see what the general consensus is. As always, if you find what we do here valuable, give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe, because we release new reefing videos every week. See you next Friday with another BRStv Investigates.